types let you redirect from output to input, but if you want to redirect from output to a file, then you can just use the greater than key. For instance, if I wanted to copy a file and I didn't know about CP for some reason, then I could just cat the file and funnel it over to some other file. And then you can see if I cat text1 versus cat foo, then they're going to be exactly the same thing. And you can see that also if I diff them. See, they're completely the same. If I wanted to find all of the lines in text1 that had both cats and dogs, then I could grep for cat in text1 and output that to some new file. Then you can see that the temporary file that I just created has all lines that have cat somewhere in them. And I could look through this file for every line that has dog in it. And here you get the one line that has both cat and dog. And if I wanted to output that to a file, then I could just use the greater than sign, which I like to think of as a funnel, into some file. What would happen if I did that again? You can see it still has the same thing as before. In other words, it doesn't append to a file, it just completely rewrites the file. That means if that you try to funnel something into a file that already exists, it'll completely clobber the old file. If you want to append to the end of the file, instead of clobbering any file that already exists, you can use the greater than sign. This time, if I cat bar, you can see that it'll have the same line 2 times. If I do that a few more times, then it'll just have the same line appended a few more times. If I want to cat the entire file, then you can see that that'll just copy it. If I do that again, this time with greater than, then the file will be duplicated. So you can see if I do word count on text1, and then word count on bar, that bar is twice as long as text1. In addition to redirecting standard output, you can redirect standard error. In case you didn't know, input and output in Unix systems works exactly the same way as files. In other words, standard input is file descriptor 0, standard output is file descriptor 1, and standard error is file descriptor 2. When I read from file 0, that's reading from standard input. When I write to file 1, that's writing to standard output, i.e. writing to the screen. And when I write to file descriptor 2, that's writing to standard error, which will normally go to the screen, but it's generally reserved for error messages. What that means is that if you don't want to see any error messages when you're running, you can redirect standard error somewhere else. The way that you do that is, instead of saying greater than, you say to greater than. In other words, file descriptor 2 funnel. For instance, if I type a gibberish command, then I'll get the error command not found. If instead I don't want to see the error and I just want to get on with my life, I can type some gibberish, output to standard error to /dev/null. And then it'll still exit with an error status, but that's just something I have implemented on the shell. It never printed out command not found, because I outputted it to a null file. In other words, a file that you can output as much as you want to it and nothing's going to happen. If instead of outputting to dev null, I wanted to output it to any other random file, I could just output it to some temp file in the current directory. And then you can see when I print out that temp file, it'll have command not found. And just like with standard output, you can append instead of just funneling it. And now you see it appended. I redirect my output to files most commonly when I want to save the results of something for later. So for instance, when I'm running a program for a class, or when I'm going over a bunch of text files and I want to save the results for later, I'll just output the results of the command to some file. Or for instance, if you want to run a command 100 times and see what the different results are between each time, you can output each one of them to a different file, and then look at all of the files later.